an attempt to de-cleanse the Palestinians from their land, to exact another Nakba on the Palestinians there. In conjunction, we find that there are this massive attempt now worldwide, mainly in the Western world, to intimidate and silence all voices for Palestine and for Palestinian rights. Not only Palestinian voices, but all voices, whether Jewish voices, Christian voices, whatever background is, they're all being targeted. Now, if you read about, in the right-wing media, even in some of the liberal outlets, going after Black Lives Matter, just because they stated their support for Palestinian rights. Suddenly you have some of their former allies who are coming out against them, attacking them for standing with the Palestinian rights. Same thing is happening with us, whether as a community or as an organization. Now, while our people are being now dehumanized in Palestine, now we're being delegitimized, or there are these attempts to delegitimize our voices here, to marginalize us. Whenever we were called by the media to comment on the events on Gaza, the first question you're asked always, do you condemn Hamas? Do you condemn what happened on October 7th? And if you try to just explain the context now, it's not that I'm taking a position for or against. That's not my issue here now. If you try to contextualize what is taking place there, you're suddenly accused of being a terrorist apologist. Suddenly now you're a sympathizer. But for the other side, they never face these voices. They never face the same harsh and tough questions, the same accusations in terms of supporting genocide. But in the case of the Palestinians, no, you're supporting genocide because already they ruled that what happened on October 7th is a genocide. So we see this is now happening not only to organizations like ours, like AMP, but also we've seen it happening now with some members of Congress. Rashida Tlaib, I guess, was censored today, or they're voting on it today, but it's going to happen. Some other members of Congress now are being threatened with, with primaries and by opponents who are well funded by AIPAC, and they're coming very clear about it. One of the most absurd things that I've heard, the group of Jewish Voices for Peace who went inside Congress to demonstrate what Congress is doing, the Congress support for Israel, were accused Hamas insurrectionists, comparing them to those who occupied and who invaded the Congress on January 6, 2021. So we see these attempts now to silence all of our voices. One of the issues now we're dealing with is this subpoena by the Virginia Attorney General, who unfortunately issued a statement and the subpoena that are defamatory and dangerous, accusing us of supporting terrorism, although there is no substance into it. And imagine if you're accused of supporting terrorism, you would imagine that there is a criminal indictment, not a civil indictment. But everyone knows that this is a political posture, and everyone knows that this is has no merit and no substance. But again, someone who's looking for his political fortunes. Our event in Chicago, our convention, and during Thanksgiving was canceled by the hotel because the hotel received so many threats. CARE had to deal with the same issue. Arab Americans, even Christian Americans, had to deal with the same issue in Orlando, in Arizona, in Houston. Our organization, you've talked about the students and what they're facing now in schools. All of that is happening. All of the fueling of Islamophobia, including by the president himself, when he used a debunked lie about beheaded Israeli children, is fueling Islamophobia that accumulated in the murder of a Palestinian American child, 6 years old, in Chicago, Wadi' al-Fayoumi. And yet no one is talking about Islamophobia other than another stunt by this administration to announce that they're launching a new committee to investigate and to combat Islamophobia, while the administration is the driving force, or one of the driving forces of Islamophobia now, with the media or so-called mainstream media. So no one is talking about it, but everyone is accusing those who go and demonstrate for Palestinian rights, demanding an immediate and complete ceasefire, demanding humanitarian aid, No one is defending Hamas, and no one is speaking for Hamas, and Hamas doesn't have an extension here. But still, since even with these demonstrations, these rallies that come from different backgrounds, intersectional movement that is coming together to speak out for against the American support, blind support for the Israeli atrocities, are called Hamas sympathizers, are accused of fueling Islam, anti-Semitism, while you have a good percentage of those who are demonstrating, and those who are speaking out are Jewish themselves. So this shows you that it's unfortunate that we're dealing with this environment, including some resolutions in the House and the Senate to condemn anti-Semitism. But the way I look at it, and I want to conclude with this, is that the reason why they're going after our voices and they're trying to silence us is because they know that we're effective, that things have shifted. The trajectory is going upward in terms of the support of our Palestinian rights in the past 10, 13 years. So there is that change that is taking place to the point where now more Democrats, or at least back to March 16, 2023, as in the Gallup study, the Gallup poll, that showed that more Democrats now are sympathizers with the Palestinians as opposed to Democrats sympathizing with Israel, 49 to 38. So they see the shift, and they see the shift even mostly within the younger generations, the youth. Even now, some of the public opinion has shifted a little bit on the Palestinian rights because of the way the media is portraying the issue, the one-sided media, but still, to their amazement, that the younger generation is still more supportive of the Palestinian rights, to the point where you had one poll by Harvard that showed that 48% of Gen Zs are more supportive, sympathetic to Hamas than to Israel. Now, 48 as opposed to 52 with Israel. But we're not talking about Palestinian now. We're talking about Hamas, who's being demonized, compared to ISIS in our media. Still, you find 48% of the Gen Zs are sympathetic with Hamas, not the Palestinians. But if you ask what about about sympathies with the Palestinians as opposed to Israel, you will find that the numbers within the numbers are in favor of the Palestinians. So this shows you why they're going after our voices, because they know that the future belongs to us if we continue to invest right and to work effectively, while they belong to the past. They still may have some holds, they may still have a hold on the present, but they know that the future is not working in their favor, because the younger generations are pivoting away, they're moving away from this propaganda machine orchestrated and fueled by our mainstream media. So I think that's why they're going after our voices. Well, that's why they're trying to delegitimize and censor us. It's because they know that we're effective, and with all of the support Israel now is enjoying, with the establishment fully behind Israel, still you see cracks within the administration and cracks in Congress now, because time has changed and they want to make sure that this does not reach the point where it will affect policy here. And that's our challenge, is to make sure that this will translate into impacting policy here in the United States.
Thank you so much. Dr. Osama Abu-Rashad, he's the Executive Director of American Muslims for Palestine. I'm so sorry to hear about the pressure coming down from above in Virginia, but we know that there will be lots of pushback in the other direction, and the hotels are certainly a challenge. I recently read a Data for Progress poll that 80% of Democrats want a ceasefire, 66% overall of the U.S. public surveyed want a ceasefire. So we see this tremendous disconnect between what the U.S. public wants and what Congress's intent on funding. And so the pressure, we need to keep up with the pressure. And please do stay with us for the rest of the call. During our Capitol calling party, we'll be calling our representatives to again say, we want you to sign on to a ceasefire resolution and vote no on more weapons for Israel, the $14 billion that President Biden wants. And I don't know if you heard, but the Center for Constitutional Rights and Palestine Legal, they sent a letter to every member of Congress, putting them on notice, basically warning them that a vote for the supplemental for more weapons for Israeli genocide could lead to legal liability as accomplices to genocide before the International Criminal Court. And on Thursday, during the global shutdown for Palestine, and we have some information on that, we'll take a look at that later, with actions across the country. In my hometown, we'll be taking the UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide to our congressman's office to put him on notice as well. That's Salud Carvajal. All right, now we're going to go to our next guest. I would like to introduce the Executive Director for CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations in the San Francisco Bay Area, Zahra Billoo. This CARE chapter is the oldest one in the organization. Since joining it in 2009, Zahra has led the organization through a period of six-fold growth. Yay. Today, she manages one of the largest CARE offices in the country with a team of civil rights and social justice advocates dedicated to the empowerment of American Muslims through legal services, legislative advocacy, and community organizing. Welcome, Zahra.
Thank you so much, Marcy, for having me. I'm honored to share space with all of you in this really difficult 1 month milestone of the Israeli escalation of violence targeting Palestinians, in particular those in Gaza. So grateful to hear from Dr. Osama Abu Rashid. American Muslims for Palestine is one of my favorite organizations. It was through them that I went to Palestine a number of years ago and saw for myself what was happening on the ground. A reminder I offer frequently to people who support the cause of Palestine is that it's important to send money abroad to support relief efforts, but it's also so important to ensure that we are funding advocacy work in the United States, because it is our policymakers that are the source of the problem. And then Marcy and Medea, just huge fans. We were talking at CARE yesterday about how you both, and CODEPINK in particular, you are the role models for lack of better words, for disruption of everyday normalcy. The fact that you get louder when they try to arrest you is something that inspires all of us. And so thank you for leading the way and being the light when it comes to the necessary civil disobedience now and for so many years. What we're looking at right now, and I was talking to someone about this earlier today, is if we were to compare this period of targeting of Muslim and pro-Palestine activists in the United States, the closest comparison we can come to is the post 9/11 era. About a week before everything began, on September 30th, I was talking to and hearing from our research team at CARE National, and it was the first time in 28 years that CARE was reporting a decrease in complaints of Islamophobia. We had actually seen a decline. We were hopeful. This is September 30th. We are sitting in the San Francisco Bay Area saying the numbers are down, and this is really good. It means that Muslims feel more included, they feel more welcome in spaces, and that overall hate-based targeting is down. Everything changed on October 7th, as many of us found hope in seeing Palestinians break free from the world's largest open-air prison. Many of our fellow Americans revealed their genocidal tendencies. I don't want to say that they became genocidal. I think that they actually revealed their genocidal tendencies and their willingness to give a blank check to ethnic cleansing overnight. We have documented now an over 200% increase in complaints of Islamophobic incidents. I'll repeat that. An over 200% increase. And that's just who is coming forward. That's just who's complaining about anti-Muslim, anti-Arab, anti-Palestinian sentiment. In terms of what we're seeing, we immediately saw schools and school boards get this wrong. The worst example of this in my experience has been Los Angeles Unified School District, the largest school district in the country, putting up an Israeli flag on its website, followed by superintendents and principals making statements across that district that were really problematic. We received those complaints from parents and from students, and repeatedly what they said is that we don't feel safe at school. This is giving permission to our teachers and to other students to bully and harass us. Across the country, we've seen problematic actions at all levels. Pre-October 7th, we were already reporting that Muslim students experience bullying at twice the national average. So imagine what it's been like in October. At workplaces, we also saw a flood of one-sided statements Most major technology companies, and I speak from sitting in the Silicon Valley where that's their biggest employment sector, but we saw this across the board at hospitals. We saw it in the big five financial firms. We saw it at law firms, and we saw it at technology companies saying that they stand with Israel. Nobody asked them what their position on foreign policy was. Nobody asked them to comment on Israel or Palestine. And here, within days of the escalated Israeli aggression in Gaza, we saw companies issuing these one-sided statements. We saw several technology companies pledge money and employee match contributions to Israeli charities. And the result of that was that Muslims and pro-Palestine voices at workplaces felt isolated, felt targeted. We've received complaints of people being terminated from their workplaces or suspended from their workplaces. So we've seen both. Sometimes for pro-Palestine speech that they engaged in the workplace, and other times for speech or action that they engaged in outside of the workplace. The most visible examples we've seen of this have actually been with law students. There were several on the East Coast who had their law firms rescind their job offers from them, right? And so you run into this question of what speech is protected in the workplace, right? Organizing speech is, union speeches, but if you're just speaking out for Palestine, it may or may not be, and there's going to be a number of test cases that arise from that. But the consequences is that people are afraid of speaking out in the workplaces. We've seen, I'll talk on two last types. The third we've received reports of is people who are being visited by the FBI. This is not surprising. Law enforcement traditionally follows foreign policy when it comes to who they will target and how they will do that targeting. I remember I was aghast when the Arab Spring happened and people who had ties to countries where there were democratic uprisings were being visited by the FBI at their homes and their workplaces and asked, do you know anything about what's going on? So we've received a number of those complaints from the East Coast as well. We worry that there will be more as activism increases and sustains, in fact, but also as Palestinians come back into the United States, that the FBI may visit them to ask them, what do you think about what's happening in Gaza? What are your thoughts on Hamas? And the list goes on. I'll note here, if you're visited by law enforcement and you didn't call them, please call a lawyer. That is the absolute necessary thing to do. Call CARE, call Palestine Legal, call ACLU, call the criminal defense attorney down the street. Do not speak to law enforcement without counsel present. The last thing I'll note in terms of the types of complaints we've received are complaints of Islamophobia on the streets, at protests, and in everyday interactions. And this has come up in a lot of different ways. So people have complained about how they have felt as they've seen just the plastering of pro-Israel messaging on billboards and light poles and telephone poles across their neighborhoods. They've also complained of being yelled at and harassed on the street. There have been a lot of questions about safety going to protests. And I recall very directly that in the first week this was happening, and it remains the case, mosques had to increase their security, right? The big question of if we are seeing violence on the street and we are seeing hate crimes with individuals being attacked, then when hundreds, if not thousands of Muslims are gathering in one place, we need to make sure that they are safe. And so the spread is wide, but that is what we are working on at CARE. We are working around the clock, supporting protests, participating in the advocacy efforts, working to place people from Palestine in front of the TV cameras so that it's not unrelated people or uncredentialed experts, but actually people with the experience, and then responding to an over 200% increase in complaints of anti-Muslim, anti-Arab, and anti-Palestinian activity at school, at work, in interactions with law enforcement, and then of course just in daily interactions when it comes to hate crimes and hate incidents. I'll leave you with one request for everyone on this call is report everything. If it makes you feel unsafe, if it is intimidating, if you are being targeted for your identity, ethnic or national, your religious beliefs or your political beliefs, report it. Report it to CARE, report it to Palestine Legal, and report it to anyone else that is tracking it. Let the lawyers and the researchers do the job of determining what is and is not an actionable complaint. We want to make sure that we're documenting everything. When I say 200%, that doesn't account for the people who aren't calling and helping, but instead are suffering quietly. And we want to make sure that we are lifting up your stories and your data to make the very necessary argument that as our government dehumanizes Palestinians in Palestine, that violence is not limited to international borders, but will in fact come home to reap what it sows.
Thank you so much. What an eloquent presentation and informative one as well. Zahra Billoo, she is the Executive Director of the Council on American Islamic Relations, the San Francisco chapter. And we will all remember, don't talk to law enforcement if they knock on the door and ask about your politics and Palestinian rights, your protest activity. Don't talk to them. Talk to a lawyer and report everything. Sage advice. So thank you for that. Our next guest, I'm very honored to introduce a longtime CODEPINK supporter. Lara Shihai is an assistant professor of clinical psychology at George Washington University's Professional Psychology program, where she is the founding faculty director of the Psychoanalysis and the Arab World Lab. Lara's work takes up decolonial and anti-oppressive approaches to psychoanalysis with a focus on liberation struggles in the Global South. After Stand With Us, SWU, a pro-Israel group, understatement, named only her in a discrimination complaint against the university with the U.S. Department of Education, the American Psychoanalytic Association barred Lara from speaking on a panel titled Psychotherapy in Conditions of War. Following an exhaustive third-party investigation, the university exonerated Lara of all wrongdoing. So honored to have you with us tonight for this program, Censorship, Viva Palestina. Welcome, Lara Shihai.
Thank you so much, Marcy, and thank you, Medea and CODEPINK for all your work. And أسامة وزهرة يعطيكم ألف عافية. شكرا على كل شغلكم ومساء الخير للجميع. So I'm going to just speak briefly about my case, but really I want to make the sort of larger point that my colleagues here have also made, that what we are seeing right now has a long runway, as they say. There has been decades and decades and decades of work that has caused this moment and has allowed for forces and for the United States government to come through and turn what once was, we can call boutique cases by pro-Israel advocacy groups into a campaign of state repression. And I think this is what we're seeing right now, and why it's so important for us to get behind protecting students, faculty, academics, and everybody on campuses. Our campuses have always been, we know under fascist times that it's intellectuals and campuses that sort of get targeted first. But right now, our campuses really are a place of contestation, and we need to rally everything we have behind, particularly our students who are leading the way and sort of, as always, in showing their voices, and as Osama said, sort of really imagining a new world and a new future for us all. And so my case is a textbook in many ways. In last October, I had the preeminent feminist Palestinian scholar who also has Israeli citizenship come and give inaugural talk for the Psychoanalysis in the Arab World Lab. Her name is Nadira Shalhoub Kavrkian, who incidentally also in the so-called democratic state of Israel is being repressed, not allowed to speak, and have heard from very reliable Israeli sources that the Department of Education in Israel has put pressure on the president of Hebrew University where she works and pressured the rector to intimidate her and try to fire her and make her leave Hebrew University. So if we think that this is just in the United States, it's anybody, anywhere. This is somebody with Israeli citizenship. So our ideas about who has rights and where they work is really on display right now for us all. So Nadira spoke to us and spoke about Israeli mental health washing. We've all heard of pink washing by the Israeli state. And I'm a clinician, and many of us are concerned that there is also mental health washing where states like Israel, for example, in parallel to USAID, might come in on a scene of a crisis and use that as an opportunity to normalize, to sort of really, and there are Israeli academics who've worked on this, to really push this a state agenda, and this was her position, is that we should not, as mental health clinicians, we should be very careful, especially in times of crisis, not to support any state interventions and sort of launder programs or propaganda about states in the name of mental health, and really be coercive in times of crisis for people. Following that, there were several movements in the department, students complaining of anti-Semitism. This was adjudicated on the level of my department, on the level of the deans, but that wasn't enough. So when January rolled around, Stand With Us filed a complaint with the Department of Education. And this is where it's really important for us. The way I found out about this was through a right-wing, quote unquote, news source. Instead of releasing this to the Department of Education, they released this to a right-wing news source, and they redacted everybody's name except mine, which of course we understand what that means. It's a well-oiled machine. Within 24 hours, there was a massive smear campaign that was a global smear campaign against me. I've received death threats. My partners received death threats. I have been accused of course, terrorism, being a Hamas supporter, an Ayatollahist. I mean, the most ridiculous Islamophobic things that you can think about, but more so threats of bodily harm, sexual violence, the ways in which these things collapsed immediately, the misogyny, the racism, the Islamophobia, threats of deportation. This was a very quick and very well-oiled machine, as I'm saying. In a move that we had not seen prior, George Washington University preempted the Department of Education in adjudicating this and hired a third-party investigator to investigate the claims based on pressure from outside sources. Of course, Stand With Us as a right-wing organization works with multiple sort of shell organizations to astroturf and demand certain movement. And this is the reason why, for example, JVP Healthcare Advisory Council wrote a letter for me. The Middle East Studies Association, Academic Freedom wrote a letter for me. There was 2,500 people across the world signing letters because all of us were concerned about the backdooring of fascism, especially in clinical psychology, and in this case, in psychoanalysis, based on what was happening and how quickly this was moving. This, as Marcy noted, this was a comprehensive third-party investigation. Of course, Stand With Us and their supporters were incredibly happy at the beginning and said, see, this is why she's actually guilty, because there's no way that George Washington University would expend this much money under tight. We know how tight university belts have been, especially during COVID. There's no way they would spend this much money to do this unless we knew. Well, after 3 months, including eyewitness accounts from multiple students, including comprehensive interviews with faculty, with administrators, the third-party investigator, which is an internationally renowned firm that also has an Israel practice in it and an anti-boycott legislation practice in it, hardly in my favor, for the first time ever released a legal document that underlined that not only had they found me entirely without fault, but that Stand With Us had fabricated, decontextualized, and completely misled in terms of what they represented, what actually happened in the classroom and in the brown bag that Nadir Shalhoub-Karukian had presented. More than that, they went further and said that equating anti-Israel or sort of the critique of Israel with anti-Semitism would be an encroachment on academic freedom, which is where we find ourselves right now. Of course, the second this came out, Stand With Us, that was once happy, immediately turns around and says, this was a sham investigation. These were hired investigators. This was GW's lawyers. I can assure you myself, 3 months of being iced out and having to go through an investigation that was truly felt like legal proceedings, that this was in no way a sham investigation. But it just shows the agility with which their positions shift, shows us what the actual intent was. The intent is to harm. Worse than this, what we have seen, especially in psychoanalysis, as Marcy mentioned, I was barred from speaking at the American Psychoanalytic Association. This is an association that I've held leadership positions in which I've sat on the program committee for, and in one fell swoop, barred me entirely from speaking, which goes against their entire due process. Nobody was notified. Many high-profile psychoanalysts resigned as a case of this. It was noted that this was discriminatory in nature and that it was because of my politics, my race, my ethnicity that this was happening. What we find out, and what is very concerning, is that there are external players that are infiltrating fields and making these sort of giving playbooks to folks and putting pressure on organizations. This is happening again right now with the president of the American Psychological Association, who now has a change.org petition against her to remove her for something she didn't even say. Right? Because the APA sent out a report and said they condemned Hamas, of course, but then also for the first time in the history of the APA mentioned Palestinians and mentioned anti-Arab hate. And this sort of full submission is what these right-wing organizations are looking for. I'll say just a couple last things here. I'm not sure if many of you have already seen, but there's a wonderful forensic expose in The Nation by James Bamford talking about how these campaigns are actually coordinated by the Israeli government that works with Psy Group. It's an Israeli psychological war firm, as he notes, with close connections to the Mossad. It's called Project Butterfly, and the proposal as outlined by them is an espionage outline and including operations within, quote, the theater of action, which is the United States. Right. And so there is billions of dollars going into these clandestine operations targeting. And part of what they say is their purpose is to, quote, damage specific Americans and U.S. organizations associated with the boycott movement, developing ways to disrupt their activities, lead them to be falsely investigated by the authorities, and run a hidden media influence campaign against them. So its secret internal operations plan includes executing intelligence and influence efforts and an infrastructure for narrative warfare, alternative messaging, and negative platforms. And what does that mean? It means they create fake news outlets. They actually create fake news, Facebook personas, posts. This is bots. They have a sort of a bot place where they generate hits, they generate emails to universities, they generate emails to administrators. So my case, if anything we can see, is quite ordinary, but we are moving into the place where now this is becoming, with the help of Biden and the federal government, has become a state operation. And that's the place where we really need to be concerned right now, especially as we move towards full-blown fascism, and why I think it's really important for us to be to know every single case. The last thing I will say is that I'm in close contact with folks across Palestine, and I cannot underscore how important it is for them to see people show up in the streets, to see events like this. It gives them hope. Those within the 1948 borders of the state now known as Israel are not allowed to post. They're not allowed to say anything. They're not allowed to like anything, but they're watching and they're seeing, and it really means the world to everyone. So if you feel tired, just remember that, and please do keep up the pressure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Lara Shihai. Wow. We see the hotels, we hear about the hotels canceling, we hear about students being investigated, but we don't always have an inside view of what's going on in the field of clinical psychology. And it does make a lot of sense that if you wanted to manufacture consent for ethnic cleansing, that would be a place you would focus on the narrative, infiltrating psychology departments and silencing voices of dissent. We're so sorry about all that you had to contend with, but very relieved that after this exhaustive investigation, all was cleared, and Stand With Us is not happy. Oh dear. Okay. All right. Let's go to our next speaker. Medea will introduce her.
Yes, this is our last speaker, and then we'll have a quick Q&A and take action. And I'm very excited to introduce our friend from Belgium, Sutkin van Meulen, who is works for a wonderful peace group in Belgium called Vrede, in support of the Palestinian struggle for liberation, campaign to boycott, divest, and sanction Israel. We thought it would be good to talk to her. She has also been to Gaza, about the censorship throughout Europe that's happening. We don't have much time, Sitkin, so I hope we can cover this quickly, but we do want it to be clear that this is not only happening here in the United States. So thank you so much for joining us. Can you unmute?
Yep. Hello, everybody. Thank you for staying up for me. And thank you for everybody's very interesting presentations and good work. I was asked to say a few things about the protests in solidarity with the Palestinians in Europe, and also about the attempts to block or criminalize them, which is, as Medea says, something that also happens in the democratic states of Europe. But the European Union in foreign affairs is absolutely not a union. So there are a lot of differences in the different states. So I'm just going to focus on the ones where this censorship or these attempts to block protests are the worst or the most common, and that's the UK, Germany, and France. And I think the ban that on protests, street protests that have been going on in France is the most known, because it was in the international press. But first of all, before I say something about these protests and these bans, it's important to say that the reaction of European leaders after the 7th of October was different than during previous flare-ups or wars in Gaza or Israeli operations in Gaza, because this time they were much more vocal and much more explicit in their support for Israel. Before, they were always very stressing we don't want any escalation and we are for a two-state solution. Now everybody was like keen to say how they were very much in solidarity with Israel and thought they had the right to defend themselves. And I think this also, the fact that in I think the first 10 days after the attack of Hamas, I think the heads of state of France, UK, Germany, Greece, the Netherlands, Italy, they all flew physically to Tel Aviv to show their solidarity. So this is basically very different than previous times. And I think it has also shrunk the space to be in solidarity with the Palestinians. And then especially in those three countries. But in spite of that, there's plenty of protests in Europe. They're going on from the beginning. In Belgium, and 4 days after the attack, we were in front of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs with 3,000 people. 10 days later, we were 40,000 people in Brussels. This has been going on in the whole of Europe and has been growing because, of course, the atrocities are getting worse and the massacre keeps on going and people are incredibly angry and they feel the need to go out. Also, people that are quite not political and have no strong opinions on Israel-Palestine, have no knowledge specifically about the situation, but just feel that this is so inhumane, and so they feel the need to show this. I have to make it short, right? So in France, they had the Minister of Foreign Affairs put out a directive to ban all street protests, pro-Israeli street protests. Now, in foreign press, this has been reported as a general ban that is like enforceable, but actually he doesn't have like the the power to do that. It's like in the US, I assume, in these democratic European countries, that every demo has to be checked case per case and by the local administrative prefectures, préfecture in France. So there have been bans, but there also have been authorized protests in France. And there have been bans upturned by the courts because people immediately go to court when there's a ban. And especially in Paris, they have been waiting a long time. The first legal demo in France was now the fourth, while there was also the huge demo in Washington. And there were 60,000 people, which was the first legal one. Okay, so, but it just, they can't, it's just not tenable anymore to keep on pushing for these bans, because I mean, the people are getting angry and angrier, and also the actual politicians, a lot of leaders in Spain and Belgium are getting really uncomfortable and are really condemning Israel. And in Spain, ministers have used the term genocide. So it's just not tenable anymore to do that. Then in comparison, Germany, I want to just say something very short about Germany, because that's a very special case, because they have like this, it's like a cult of guilt that has been perpetuated for already several years. And they have this thing that in the name of coming to terms with their past, they are incredibly sensitive to anything that can be perceived as anti-Semitic, as the perpetrators of the Holocaust, of course. And so the thing is that in Germany, anything that is pro-Palestinian is almost automatically seen as anti-Semitic. So the space is very small to say anything. This is something that goes over the whole political spectrum there, that the media, the mainstream media, is also very sensitive about. And so there have also been bans. It's the same system as in France. It's case per case, but it's not new. They have been doing this for years. So, but now, of course, it gets into the news. But for instance, last year, all the Nakba commemoration actions or events were all banned in Germany. So this is something that is really common there. And the thing is that because of this special situation that's also very ingrained in the actual population of the German population, it is, it's like a self-censure in a way. I mean, in the end, last weekend, they finally in Berlin also had a legal protest, but there were 11,000 people. This is a capital of a huge European country. But that is considered one of the biggest protests, pro-Palestinian protests in the history of Germany. So this is a specific situation. In Germany, there also like there's a very famous football player in the top league of Germany that got kicked out of his team for having a pro-Palestinian posts. They have now on the 2nd of November, the Ministry of the Interior Ministry has forbidden Samidun, which is like a Palestinian network, international solidarity network for Palestinian political prisoners. They have just banned this there. It's not legal anymore. They can't do any activities. So there it is very heavy, the censorship. And then you have maybe the UK, where there are no bans, but I think from what I read and see, is maybe more comparable with the situation in the US, where you have a very biased, just like in Germany, mainstream media, and you have in the political spectrum also, and the government is very pro-Israel, but also then Labour, the current leader of Labour is also quite very pro-Israel. There's been people getting kicked out of the Labour Party for saying things, doing things. People have stepped out of the Labour Party as a protest for the the labor leadership being so pro-Israel. So, but there are no bans. It's more, so the street protests are all allowed. And actually, it's the government that is pressuring the police, because also there it's the same system. The police decides, pressuring the police to ban now for the first time a big pro-Palestinian rally, because it's going to be on the 11th, which is Armistice Day, which is like a very big deal in the UK. And so, but the Metropolitan Police already said we are not going to be put, let us be put under pressure by the politicians. There is no reason not to ban this demo, so it's going through. So the thing is, maybe just to finish, there's a growing movement. There's loads of protests. They keep on going. And I think that, I mean, it is very important, just as the previous speaker said, that we keep on going in the streets. I'm also in contact with people in Gaza, and for them, it is really, really important just to know that they're not standing alone. So maybe if you think, what can I do when my government doesn't listen to me? Just this is so important, this show of solidarity. So yeah, I'll finish here.
Thank you so much. Sutken van Meilen. She is with Verde, a Belgian peace organization. It's great to get, an overview of what's going on in Europe, and to know that, governments can say you can't march or you can't protest, but if people do it anyway, I don't know what power the government has, right? We're going to jail everybody? I don't think so. So that's encouraging. Germany is a whole other story, and I'm glad to hear that people were out in Berlin, I think you said, as well. So we're going to spend the next 5 to 10 minutes taking some questions and having some back and forth, and then go to our Capitol calling party. Do please stay with us, because we will be making those very important phone calls to Capitol Hill, to our representatives, to say, sign on to Rashida Tlaib's ceasefire resolution, or introduce your own in the Senate. And don't you dare vote for that $14 billion for Israeli genocide. Horrific. All right, Medea, first question.
Well, Osama, I know that we've brought up on this call the mentioned Rashida Tlaib, and I think the vote is going to be tomorrow on the censorship. But she is one of the few, and we know there's a couple of others. I just ran into Summer Lee and Jamal Bowman today, who said how attacked they have been, or they are by AIPAC groups that wanting to take them out in the next elections. So given that you have the Congressional Lobbying Day tomorrow, and yet there is so much opposition to these few courageous people, all Democrats, not one Republican, who have spoken out, what suggestions do you have about how we can support them better?
I mean, number one is to keep the pressure on our members of Congress. And I applaud you for your efforts to keep that pressure on and to call members of Congress, because if we're seeing cracks now within Capitol Hill, we're seeing it on the other side, not on the side of the few who are standing with Palestinian rights. The few are still, speaking out for the Palestinian rights. They're still, advocating against the support that the U.S. was providing to the Israeli genocide. But now on the other side, we see members from the Democrats, members of the Democrats, or the establishment Democrats like Dick Durbin, Chris Murphy. I know in a few days there will be a letter coming out from some members of the House, some of whom were supporters of the Palestinian rights, but unfortunately this time chose not to be to stand on principle. I've seen some letters coming or being suggested now. They're being circulated. That's going to come out in a few days, maybe tomorrow, after tomorrow, where they call straight forward for a ceasefire. So I think the cracks are happening in the other camp, with all of the divisions that we're seeing now within the Biden campaign. We're hearing about this generational gap, that generational shift where you have the youngers are very critical, or where the Biden administration is standing on the situation in Gaza. We've heard about other divisions within the State Department, within USAID, within Congress. So I think that this pressure is paying off, and we have to continue that pressure. We have to continue also to show support to the few members of Congress who are taking a lot of heat. Honestly, I don't know if I can be Rashida Tlaib or Cori Bush. I don't know if I can be them. You know, the amount of pressure, the threats that they're receiving, the intimidation, the insults. I mean, it takes a lot of courage to continue to stand for what you believe in, and to continue to defend what is right. So I think not only to call our members of Congress who are standing on the wrong side of the equation, but also to call those who are standing on the right side of the equation, to show them our appreciation. I think we need, maybe in our personal capacities. I know that with C3s, even our C4, the action we cannot fundraise for politicians or give political contributions. But I think this is the time also to maybe start organizing and fundraising for them. If AIPAC is going to primary them, then let us stand behind them. Let us show them that you're not alone in this, and we're not only appreciating what you say verbally, but also we appreciate what you say with everything that we can do to help you and support you. Because I think this is a battle of wills now in America, where one side think that they have a grip over the narrative, and they think that no one can shake that narrative. But in fact, that narrative is not as strong, as solid as they think. That's why they try to silence everyone else. Otherwise, why you trying to silence a small organization like AMP? Why do you come after us, accuse us of all of these bogus accusations and lies? Trying to silence us for what? What impact do we have, in reality? But for them, no matter how small that voice is, no matter how minor that voice is, it is making a difference. And Rashida Tlaib is making a difference, and Cori Bush is making a difference, and Jamal Bowman is making a difference. And that's, for them, is a problem. So let us widen this problem and get more people elected who will stand on principle, and at the same time make sure that the ones who are standing with us don't end up fighting this alone. So I hope that we continue this, and from this forum, maybe we can organize in our personal capacities now, come up with a pack or something, and start working towards this, because I think there's a lot of interest and a lot of I'm sure we'll get a lot of traction in this context.
Thank you so much, Osama. I appreciate the reminder of how important it is to be in solidarity with these Congress members who are under a vicious attack. Yes, absolutely. And, just in my own personal experience, I try to talk to everybody in my life, everybody in my daily life about this. And what I'm finding is that people see through this manufactured consent. It's impossible really not to see through it. So thank you for that. And I have a question for you, Lara, and that is, if I were to say to you, what's the most strategic campaign we could pursue right now to penetrate the censorship in the field of clinical psychology, what would you say? I'll just say as an aside, I received an email from my own Congressman, Salud Carbajal, who's on the House Armed Services Committee. He mentioned Gazans, but he did not mention Palestine. He didn't mention Palestinians. And so when you mentioned that clinicians in Israel are not allowed to mention Palestinian in their organizational communications, it reminded me of this. And I'm just wondering how important that is to press on, so that we don't fall asleep while these people are trying to erase Palestinians, right?
Right. Well, you just answered it. I think, pushing up against settler colonial reality bending. It takes every day we disavow. We do this in the United States all the time. We live on stolen land. The naming the land on which we live has become a more regular practice. The practice is not just performative. It is one of the ways that we psychically remember not to be seduced by settler colonialism. And so speaking Palestine, remembering Palestine, bringing it up in every way we can, correcting historical information. Part of how settler colonialism works is erasing entirely, whether through language or through history or through borders, normalizing. This is the way it works, and it gets inside of us. It gets inside of us in a way where every time we feel we are starting from the get-go again and on the defensive or on the back foot, what we are seeing is a groundswell. And I think this is the generational shift I think Osama's also talking about, where folks by and large know history and also are not okay with settler colonial apartheid and erasure, right? I think the same and an intersectional movement, whether that's in clinical psychology, part of what we're seeing and what is being pushed against is the same people who are infiltrating and sort of pushing a fascist white supremacist ideology are the people who are in cahoots with pro-Israel apartheid activists, in cahoots with anti-trans bills, in cahoots with anti-reproductive justice. This is not by chance. When these folks come together, there also is a way in which they are asked, Palestine is an entry point, right? Because Palestine is the place where fascists and liberals alike throw out democratic liberal values. Liberals will come together and side with fascists when Palestine is mentioned. This is for us to be very careful about that, because if the entry point, if the door is Palestine, it will not stop at Palestine, folks. This is how what I'm talking about psychologically of backdooring fascism. And all of a sudden, people will wake up and say, all of our civil liberties are gone, all of our any claims to democratic values, any claims to liberal values are out the door entirely. And that door was Palestine. And so this is a reminder to us all why it's super important. We are seeing this in psychology, but we're seeing this across the board. I think what's shocking to people is psychology is a relatively sort of isolated field, and psychoanalysis especially, they're incredibly insular, but it's telling us something about how let's say ripe it is. We are primed to be infiltrated in this way. And I think it sets the tone going forward. So I would just, again, continue saying is truth-telling matters. This is why billions of dollars go into opposing boycott, divestment, and sanctions. This is why billions of dollars goes into these smear campaigns. This is why Cori Bush and Rashida Tlaib and folks are being attacked, because there's nothing that will stop telling the truth, right? There's nothing more powerful than that.
Absolutely. Appreciate all of your comments, Lara. And now the last question, Medea.
Well, I thought we could do one to each of our speakers. And Zara, I really found your talk tonight very compelling, and I am so appreciative of CARE. At the big march in DC this weekend, I think what was most reported on the media was the speech by your executive director, Nihad Awad, because he kept saying, in November we remember, in November we remember. And I wonder how you feel about that, especially given what Lara has been talking about and how Trump has been so key on setting the stage, or not, furthering this whole horrific fascist kind of tendencies. So, yeah, how do you feel? And also, especially since these polls that have come out talking about Biden losing in key states like Michigan, what this means for the Arab community, for the Muslim community.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Zara is still with us.
But
But
sorry, I see Osama is shaking your head there. Maybe you can answer this.
Okay, so I remember Nihad saying this, but as he cautioned that he was speaking in his personal capacity because he leads a 501c3 organization, so he wasn't speaking for CARE. But this is a sentiment within the Muslim community now. The Muslim community was pivotal in supporting Biden, and just if you take Arizona, Biden, and by the way, that's one of the lawsuits that Trump is facing is because he tried to influence the attorney general and the votes in Arizona, because he lost by maybe, I don't know, maybe 7,000, 8,000, 9,000 votes. And he wanted to find just a few thousand, just find me a few thousand votes to win, if you remember this. So I've seen a poll that suggested that 140,000 Muslims voted for Biden. In Michigan, Hillary Clinton lost Michigan because she wasn't able to inspire progressives, she wasn't able to inspire youth, and she wasn't able to inspire Palestinian, Arab, and Muslim Americans. Biden, on the contrary, was, because people voted for him because he wasn't Trump. That's why people voted for him. I think this analogy that, I am not the Trump candidate is not going to work. We've seen it now in polls, not only in relation to the Muslim community, but also in relation across the board. On economy, he doesn't score good. On mental and health fitness, he doesn't score good. On foreign policy, he doesn't score good. So, and within the Democrats, he doesn't score good. So now when you're losing your coalition, I think that is going to impact him. But one of their calculation, and this is something that was relayed by people who met with him, some of Muslims who met with him, they think that eventually we're going to vote for him because otherwise we will be faced either with DeSantis or Nikki Haley or with Trump. And Muslims have no choice, youth have no choice, liberals have no choice. I think that's a huge miscalculation on their part. And I think that's why you see now more Democrats calling for him not to run. So I know that we're a small percentage of votes, but if we're talking about, we know that you don't win the presidency by popular vote. You win it by swing states. Virginia is one of them. Arizona now, I guess, I don't know if it will continue to be as a swing state or not, but at least that it happened in 2020. But Michigan definitely, Pennsylvania definitely, and Virginia definitely. And I think he's miscalculating. His campaign is miscalculating, and the frustration within the community. I'll conclude with this. I didn't have my citizenship when Trump was a president. When he issued his Muslim ban, I had my green card. I had to sue the government until I got my citizenship in 2017. By the way, one of the ironies and paradoxes of America that I get my citizenship on September 11th, 2017. And my name is Osama, O-S-A-M-A, and everyone knows what the name resembles. So, but this is one of the paradoxes of America. And I think that's why I'm a believer. Let's continue the fight. That's how it works here in America. But at the time, yes, Muslims were fearful of Trump. But one of the things that Trump was successful at is creating and forming a social justice movement that is collective, unified against him and against his bigotry. So the Muslims might be victimized if they vote or don't vote for Biden, if they vote for Trump or they don't vote for Biden, if they just cast a white paper. But I think that's when Democrats will start noticing, and that's when our elected officials will start noticing that you cannot continue to discount voices and discount people in America just because you think that they will forget and they will not hold you accountable and that they will not remember on the day of election. So I think that's part of the calculation on our side.
Yeah.
And, as someone who lived through the Trump era, I would rather going against Trump than going against Biden, who claims to be a compassionate, claims to be the wise man. No, I would rather going against someone who everyone thinks that he's moron, everyone thinks he's erratic, everyone thinks he's extremist, everyone thinks, and maybe he is, someone who's bigoted, because that will give me a depth in a movement rather than being isolated or dehumanized within this movement, where now we're being accused of being sympathizers of terrorism instead of being defending people who are defenseless, who have nothing. No one is amplifying their voices, and those who are amplifying their voices are being being eradicated, or there are attempts to eradicate their voices by canceling them. So I would rather going against someone who's known as a bigoted and who does not have a depth and cannot claim moral authority as this president who continues to utter this word, moral authority and moral clarity. There is
Yes.
no moral authority and moral clarity. It's better to deal with Trump, in my personal opinion.
Well, thank you for sharing your personal opinion. You mentioned the swing states of Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Virginia, how Biden is losing the Muslim vote there. I mean, it's just dropped radically. And I think that we have to use our leverage, and we cannot tolerate this, and we cannot support this. And so the only way to push for change is to say that we're not going to vote. But Code Pink is not, it's a 501c3, so that's just my personal opinion. Last question for you, Sutkin. I'm listening to you talk about Germany. Everything's so convoluted, upside down, crazy. Do you think it makes any sense to try to approach the German embassies here, the consular general in major cities, to say, we don't like this, we're on record, we're very disappointed? I mean, does that matter?
I don't know. I think you have the least chance to have an impact there, actually. I think other consulates might be better targets. Maybe, from countries that obviously are critical, but because they're in the union and the union has decided to have this weak stance of having a humanitarian pause, that's what they are asking. And they say Israel has the right to defend itself, but it has to be within international law. So these are the weak statements that they have as a common bloc. But as we know, several of the governments are really not pleased with this weak statement. So maybe it could be interesting to pressure them to have their own statement as a
So
country.
do you want to name some specific governments?
Well, I think the biggest is Spain. So I think the Belgian government, we have, with my organization, we have been speaking with the Belgian Minister of Foreign Affairs. They're actually, when we go there as a pro-Palestinian movement, we support the BDS for years already, and we have been doing actions for years and years, so they know us. I have to say, when we have these conversations, they agree with everything we're saying, really, which is quite, they actually say, it's right. I mean, there is no discussion there. So, but then still, there is no statement from the Belgian government that is really substantial. I mean, yesterday, the Prime Minister of Belgium said, this is really getting completely disproportional. They're saying things like that, man. I mean, that's not really a very good statement, I think. But I don't know. I think it's more in Europe itself that people need to do that. And I hear you have a lot of work here, much more work, I think, in the sense that if you think about the whole of Europe, even in the European Parliament and in the individual governments of the states, there is a much more diversity than here. I mean, hearing that only 18 people of the Congress support a ceasefire resolution is baffling. I mean, in the European governments and certainly the parliaments, I mean, not the governments, the parliaments, there's a much bigger range of opinions. And I think in several of these parliaments, the really pro-Israel stance, in a way that you hear it here and maybe from the UK, is really a minority. So, and certainly with the people. So the problem is the EU as a bloc,
Yes. We love her daily. We want to amplify her voice. And I really want to thank all of you for joining us tonight. And I want to ask everybody to unmute and show your appreciation, your gratitude for our fantastic lineup here, talking about censorship, Viva Palestina, and ways to challenge the censorship and expose it at the same time. So let's thank everybody.
Thank you so much. Wonderful, wonderful information.
Yes. I don't know, Grace, if you're able to unmute everyone.
Yeah, and don't leave, everyone, because we're going to take action, but our speakers
Right.
can leave after we thank them.
Thank you.
very
Oh,
much.
also,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank
Viva.
you.
Viva
Thank
Stein.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Hey,
much.
Maria, how are you?
Thank you so much.
Thank
Come
you.
on.
Yes.
Family.
Thank you.
Oh,
We can't hear you, Marcy.
I'm so sorry. Okay, now on to the Capitol Calling Party. We have a script